Hey, welcome to the Neighbors Helping Neighbors podcast. This is a function of the Robertson County Democratic Party. I'm Andrew Reed. I'm here with Mac, and if you're watching, you can probably see there's no one else on screen with me. If you're listening, you can't, but Mac's going to stay off camera today. Mac has worked in the immigration space for a long time, and this is a sensitive topic, and Mac's caught some heat in the past over working with the in the immigration space, and so he's going to remain off camera today and just allow you guys to focus on the conversational piece. Mac, how are you doing today?
How are you?
Oh, fantastic. This is something that we've been wanting to do for a long time. Immigration policies in the U.S. Are a very complex topic, and they can easily be misconstrued and they can easily be politicized. And so I think what we're trying to do today is offer some clarity into immigration and also talk about some of the current administration's policies and hopefully how Democrats can do better. And so just kind of want to start off with talking about just a little bit of your background in the immigration space.
Well, formally, I guess, besides being an advocate when I was young, working with my dad, who was an advocate, and he worked with Cesar Chavez and, raised money for orphanages throughout Mexico. His story is a little, um, well, it's way more interesting than mine, but it's also a little sketchy because there weren't a lot of records kept in the early 1900s, which is when he was born.
And he was born in Mexico?
No, my mother was.
Okay.
But we're not really clear. His birth certificate says Upland, and we're not even clear that that's the case. And I'll tie that in with my mother's story as an immigrant, because that was vastly different than the average immigrant experience. Her family was very wealthy in Mexico, landowners. And my grandfather spoke 7 languages and was schooled in Europe and was used to good things and nice things. Anyway, the Mexican Revolution happened. They lost their property, fled here. My mother arrived in the United States in a shoebox as an infant.
Oh,
Didn't
wow.
get naturalized till she was in her 50s, and that's another story, which bears telling at some point, maybe not this minute.
Fair enough. So your dad worked in that space, got you interested in that space. You have some family lineage
Yes, sir.
going back to Mexico, and we do have a lot of Latin immigrants, and so that just kind of ties into that space naturally a little bit. I think, and we'll certainly talk about issues at the southern border in this conversation, and so. You were interested in that space. How did you get? What was your kind of first true involvement in working with immigrants?
Um, in a structured space, it would have been my tenure with Turk, which for those who don't know it, is Tennessee Immigration Refugee Rights Coalition. I was hired by David Lubell, worked with him and Stephen Fotopoulos. They were I guess you could safely call them the founding members of Turk. And for some reason, they stuck me in media spokesman, so I spent a lot of time doing on-camera interviews, local news. We did a Welcome to Tennessee initiative where we put up billboards around, basically welcoming immigrants and trying to turn the tide of public opinion and, humanize these people, because there are, a vast number of groups that seek to dehumanize them. And so this was to counter that.
Right, absolutely. And for people who don't know what Turk is, like Max said, the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, they're based out of Nashville, and my involvement with them has been fairly recent, and they provide immigration resources. They'll give packets out to immigrants. They have a hotline that you can call. They provide information on how to deal with ICE if they should come to your door, and they're providing free lawyer services as they're able, but I've heard that they're quite slammed And I'm sure that's true. And also, for our listeners, Afton Bain was involved with Turk as well, and immigration is one of her big talking points as well. So shout out to Afton for being in that space. And I feel like a lot of Democrats. We do kind of venture into a lot of these service spaces as well, but that's a conversation for another time. So let's talk about some of those humanizing elements, because I think you're right on point with that. It's really easy to soak up kind of what, especially the right-wing media is saying. I think I went to a business a couple of months ago, and they had Fox News playing loudly, and in the lobby, right, as many do, and the host was talking about immigrants, and he just kept saying, "These people are illegal. These people are illegal." And I'm thinking to myself, people aren't illegal. What they may have done or may not have done, depending on the current policy that was in place in the United States at the time, may have forced them into an undocumented state. That doesn't make a human illegal. But when you say it like it's their fault and you can kind of force this idea, then people seem to be more palatable about removing said people, kind of. And unfortunately, it seems like no matter what, at this point, ICE has been getting really aggressive, and we'll talk some about that too.
Yeah.
But I'd love to dive into this human element that you talked about. Who are some of these people, and how do they become undocumented?
Yeah, so it should also be said that this is a situation that's not unique at all to the United States. Immigration policy is complex all over the globe. Countries are struggling with not just economic migrants, which there are a number of those, climate change, those escaping war-torn countries, and it's not a seamless process anywhere. There's always elements that will seek to stoke fear of the others, and it works because it's easy. And so, to that end, there's been an organized effort to dehumanize since I was a kid. What's interesting to me, at least, is when I was a young man in Los Angeles, if you saw a caricature of a Mexican, it was generally speaking a mustachioed fat guy under a sombrero leaning against a cactus tree. That was the image in most people's mind. And the inference was that we were lazy. Well, fast forward to sometime around the 2000s, probably, maybe earlier than that, where everybody started to see and admit they're hardworking, you know. And all you have to do is drive to any job site in Tennessee, and you're going to see a sea of brown faces. That's who's working. So that, I suppose, has helped quite a bit, but not enough, not anywhere near enough.
This idea of these caricatures go back hundreds of years.
Oh, sure.
I mean, when you look at the West Coast, for instance, and the Chinese who were coming over, they were predominantly railway workers,
Yeah.
and they were, yes, if you look at some of the caricatures of those people, the people who have, quote unquote, been here before have always looked at immigrants and been able to kind of point the finger and go, you know what, we don't like you coming here and taking our jobs, or whatever, they choose to espouse. And through media of some type or another, and it has been caricatures for the last couple hundred years. Now it's mainstream media. They've been rather effective in that for people, because it does remove that human element and it boils it down to that one thing. And like you were talking about, the caricatures of the Mexican men who you were saying, is to calling them lazy. And
The
so
Irish.
there's always these nuggets that people who misunderstand immigrants, they misunderstand the immigration policies, or they just don't flat out like them, can use to kind of push on to the general population as these very narrow talking points. And of course, um, now we want to go, wait a second, that is not who these people are, and try to just break this wide open so that people can actually see that these are real people, real families that are being impacted by United States immigration policies. Um, so I digress though. Let's kind of move forward into um, who actually these people are that are kind of stuck in this system. Did you have any stories that you wanted to share at this time with us, or we can
Yeah,
certainly.
I can. I touched on my mother's uh, just as a way, I guess, of explaining that these policies have never really been immigrant friendly. There are truly people on both sides of the aisle that would rather have the issue than a solution. It's politically advantageous, I guess. It's a hot button issue for sure. Anyway, as I said, my mother came here as a infant. I guess you would say she was the original dreamer. Um, and uh, worked as her and my father worked as migrant farm workers, fruit pickers, actually, oranges in California. And eventually World War II happened. My dad went to the Philippines to fight, and she was actual Rosie the Riveter type factory worker. Anyway, they raised us in the Los Angeles area. She tried to apply for citizenship many times, and one of the meetings that she had with, that wasn't called ICE back then, uh, I'm losing the term for it, but at any rate, the authorities at that time said, "Look, we can't stop you from finishing the process, but we can promise if you do that we're going to deport your mother," because I knew she was here
Hmm.
without documentation. So she had to wait until her mother died. So she didn't get her citizenship till she was in her 50s.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's a sticky immigration policy in itself, that
Yeah.
may or may not have actually been real policy because let's be honest, for a long time there really wasn't policy in place. We're talking the late 1700s, early 1800s, until people started seeing this flood of Irish immigrants come in, for instance, and they're like, whoa, economic concern. And so that's how they framed it anyway.
Sure.
And so they started really narrowing down on the amount of people that they were going to let in through gateways like Ellis Island. But for a long time, people were literally able to just kind of walk into the country. My family was started here 9 generations ago. My 9 greats ago great grandfather was a Hessian mercenary in the Revolutionary War, came over to fight for the British,
Okay.
was captured at the Battle of Trenton, and then flipped sides. He had no documentation, I'm sure, ever.
Yeah, right.
And he married an Irish sea captain's daughter, who I'm sure had no documentation whatsoever. But the next generation got a birth certificate, right? And so here we are. But that was essentially the quote unquote immigration policy. There was none. But of course, through economic worries, the people in power are able to go, hang on just a second, let's hang on to what we've got, and let's meter the rest of the people that are starting to come in. And that's essentially where we've gotten stuck at for a couple hundred years. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would.
And so let's talk about some of the reasons that people are here and undocumented. I wrote a few of them down so that I wouldn't have to try to remember these off
So
of my
so we
head.
don't
But
lose this topic.
yeah,
You did ask me about a story. I do want to tell one guy's story.
yeah, let's do that.
I know him well.
Okay.
In fact, I went to his uh, citizenship series naturalization ceremony in downtown Nashville. It was 100 people in the room all getting their citizenships. Quite the vibe if you ever get a chance. Even if you don't know somebody, I recommend going by and looking at the faces of these people. It's incredible. At any rate, he was 24 years old in 2006, and he was from Honduras. His family were farmers there. They grew plantains, bananas, beans, whatever crop was in demand, they grew. But times got hard to the point where there was just no choice but to try to seek a better life. And his older brother had gone before him, and then he came over. But the trip, so he tried the first 9 times he tried, he was caught and sent back before he ever got to Mexico. And on the 10th trip, uh, he he made it to Mexico, and that was a combination of buses, walking, trains, um, swimming across some dangerous water. And it's dangerous in of itself because of the current and the depth, but also because there were bandits and there was policia, and it's just trouble everywhere. But he made it to 2,500 kilometers later. He made it to Piedras Negras, Mexico, sort of a landing, right, staging point. From there, he paid a coyote $2,500, but that was after he worked in Mexico to earn enough to get here, and basically got into Texas broke. Had to work for a little while wherever he could to get another $500 together to get a bus to Tennessee where his older brother was. At any rate, 10 years later, he got started with his documentation, married an American woman, took on her 2 children, and first step, well, the first step, but a early step in the process was he had to get a passport. Well, that's in Atlanta. So he had to go to Atlanta. You stop work and you travel to Atlanta and you get your passport started, and you'd have to make a couple of trips. So after that, he's getting his stuff together. He has to go back to Honduras and get a Honduran passport. And while he's there, he has to get birth certificates, whatever existed for those, vaccine records, school documents, if there were any. He had to get affidavits from people who witnessed his birth. He had to get affidavits, people who witnessed his baptism. 2 years of this sort of discovery process, right? And he flew home to begin the visa process, and that led to a green card, and that led to a driver's license. Anyway, a couple years ago, he did get his citizenship, but that was 12 years and $32,000 later. So doing it the right way is certainly possible, but there's no one right way for every immigrant.
Right. And especially when the government kind of keeps shifting policies around, makes it very difficult across
Even people mandated to
administrations.
enforce it don't always know.
Right. And just the fact that he traveled so far under such dangerous conditions, had to put his money in the hands of a coyote, essentially, not knowing if that's actually going to work out or not. What kind of conditions do you have to be living in order to be willing to take that risk? And I think that's the one part of the human aspect that is missed, especially when it's reported in the media, these large, quote unquote, caravans of people that are coming up to the southern border. It's like these people have been displaced. They're not just coming here for no reason at all. They're coming from areas where there is no work. There's problems in the government. There's gang violence. They're potentially under threat of their life. And so they're coming here, and because of the policies that we have or do not have put into place, they may not be able to come into the United States at all for years or ever. We recently cut refugee allowances to come into the United States as part of the Trump administration, all across the board. But we used to have essentially a lottery number of refugee tickets, let's call them, where your number could get pulled and you could come into the United States, but that's just a luck of the draw. And there's so many other people who would be happy to be here working legally, who are under imminent threat potentially of their life, who try to to enter, who simply aren't able to because of the circumstances that the
Some of them are so
United
dire.
States has put into
Whole
place.
families that send unaccompanied minors.
Yeah. And let me put this into historical perspective for the viewers here too. If you haven't seen the Ken Burns documentary on the Holocaust, it is based around American perceptions of the Jewish people during the Holocaust. He did a special on this. It's a 3-part series, I believe, recently came out last year, I want to say. And there were many anti-Semitic newspapers in the United States. We all remember Ford as the famous auto manufacturer, but he ran the second largest newspaper at the time and was a horrible anti-Semite, actually. And many people across the United States were afraid of immigration at the time. We were isolationist, and the president was actually afraid to enter World War II until the attack on Pearl Harbor, because they were afraid that it was going to look like we were going to go save Jewish people. That was what would have potentially been used as rhetoric in the United States against entering World War II until the actual attack on Pearl Harbor. From the view of Ken Burns, people actually came over, Jewish people came over on ships and were turned away at the borders, essentially, because we were out of refugee cards.
Yeah.
So Jewish people who died in the Holocaust made it to the United States and were turned away. Some went to South America, others were able to relocate to other countries in Canada. But some were sent back to Europe, and some of them died in the Holocaust simply because of an arbitrary number that our government had set that said, we're just not taking any more. And that policy is still in place for refugees. We take a certain number, and after that number per year, that allotment is done. And so what's your capability to get into the United States at that point? You cross the border. You do it, quote unquote, illegally, because then you get an asylum hearing. And asylum hearings take, how long is it that asylum?
Fully staffed, they take forever, and we're not fully staffed.
Right.
Immigration judges are already at the brink.
Right. Years. They take years in some cases. And in that time, you're supposed to go do your check-ins, right? And from what I understand, some of these people who are going to check in with ICE are the ones that are actually being detained and deported. Is that kind of your understanding in some of this as well?
They're easy pickings.
Right. Because we've
the worst of the worst.
Right.
What's handy to meet our quotas.
Because we've set quotas, and these are people that crossed the border, and so technically they committed a misdemeanor in a lot of cases. It can actually be a higher charge if you've crossed the border multiple times.
It's a felony. But
yes, yeah. If you've crossed the border a couple of times, then it turns into a felony offense. But for a lot of these people, that was their way to claim asylum because they had no other way to do it. The Biden administration had CPB-1 set up essentially at checkpoints along the border where people could use an app called CPB-1, and they could do an asylum hearing while waiting in Mexico. And the Trump administration turned off CPB-1. So if you don't have a refugee status, and you don't have a family member who lives here, which to my understanding, that's the easiest way to come across is if you have a family member who's already legally living here, then your priority gets bumped up. We've also seen the Trump administration try to utilize money, financial incentives to be able to bring people over. You essentially pay for your citizenship. But for those people who are under threat now for their lives, who need an asylum hearing, it's much tougher. They're stuck in a situation where they're displaced from their home, but they have, no legal way to come in the United States at this point. And these are people who I'm sure would be happy to be here. We have another young lady who goes around and she does interviews with immigrant families, and we've got to have her on the podcast to share some of those stories. And those people, they just want an opportunity to be able to be here. Um, Let me look and see what else we have written down here for. Oh, right, the Haitian program. Were you familiar with that one? Where
They're eating the cats. They're
right,
eating the dog.
right. There's another caricature, right? And it's simply when the immigration policy of the government turns against a certain group, right? They start these caricatures because they want to try to dehumanize before they deport. It makes it easier for them because it's much harder.
Public opinion
Does absolutely, absolutely. It's much harder when they're your neighbor, right? And you know who these people are. But we'll come back into that a little bit.
It's funny though. In our brief conversation prior to doing this, you had mentioned, and I think rightly so, that you are reluctant to, you know, bring the specter of racism into the conversation because it can be kind of a catch-all term, right? But it is a significant driving force, but it's not the only one. There's a classism element that can't be ignored, and it's remarkable to me, and I've seen it in my own community, how willing previous immigrants are willing to pull the ladder up behind them once they've achieved a certain economic level here where they feel like they've got a foothold and they're starting to achieve the American dream. And they, even if they don't actively deny, they buy into the idea, well, I did it the right way type things.
I've encountered that same situation with people who have quote unquote done it the right way.
The right way has changed 30 or 40 times.
That's right. And it works for some people and it doesn't work for everyone. And so we have to expand that scope to recognize that just because it worked for you doesn't mean it's going to work for the next person. Absolutely.
Well, you mentioned the Haitians, and that's, I'm not deeply familiar with the policy, but I do know that obviously Haiti is probably one of the most dangerous places on earth.
It's very dangerous right now. So the Biden administration granted essentially refugee status to it was a very large blanket refugee status, and the bar to get into the United States was set lower than what it had currently been in a lot of situations, as it should be when you're dealing with refugees, because they need out right now. And there's always this argument that pops up, oh, we're going to let some bad people in. And you can never rule that out, but you don't say no to thousands of good people just because there might be one person who might commit a criminal activity here.
And we have the capability and the technology to thoroughly vet people and to register them and to make them check in.
Yes.
There are a million ways to address that.
Yes.
And yes, you're not going to get every bad apple out of the bunch.
Right.
But what is without risk that we do as a nation?
Right. And unfortunately, that vetting and that ID and that registry is now being used against those people potentially by ICE.
It's going to make them reluctant to enter the process should one come about.
Right. And so the Biden administration let Haitian refugees in. The Trump administration closed that, and not only closed it, but then reversed it and said, get out. Yeah. And they said, actually, we'll give you $1,000 to leave, to self-deport, because you're no longer welcome here, essentially. Could you imagine getting here?
Integrated and working.
Right.
Communities loved it.
They're here. They're safe. They're starting to grow their family. And then the government says, go back. Go back to those unsafe conditions. It's beyond cruel. It's just it's unconscionable, really. Yeah. And I think the way that we have to counter this is to start humanizing these people. One of my favorite lecturers, his name is Brian Stevenson. He works in the criminal justice space, and he's done work for death row inmates and actually exonerated people from death row. And he works a lot in the racial justice space too. And he says, if you're not proximate with the issue, then you can't understand. And I think that's that's what I want to let people know, is that they have to start listening to immigrant stories. And I think one of the best ways to do that is through just podcasts like this. You hear actual people come on and say, these are our stories and this is what's happened to me. And you go, oh my gosh, our system is broken and it does not treat people fairly across the board at all. We have a system that treats you much better if you're wealthy than if you're poor, unfortunately. And if you're in a war-torn area, you probably don't have very much money at that point to start escaping from that. And
I'm again, I know we're reluctant to make too much of this, but if you are a different skin color, it's different. Nobody cares about the Canadian nurse that's drawing your blood who overstayed her visa. There's no fear mongering there. She looks like us. You know what I'm saying?
right.
The assimilation process is much smoother.
There's always things with this administration that make you raise an eyebrow, like when we turned off status for the Haitians, but then we were going to open it up to just white South Africans. So there is a aspect of that you cannot deny, because the administration has done that, and it does make you go, why? And it's something to dig into for sure. And let's see. So we also have, just kind of back on this train of how people get here and they're undocumented. So like the Haitians, they were here legally. Now they're not here legally just because of change of the government. You have the DACA kids.
That's particularly cruel.
So they were taken here, if you're unfamiliar, deferred action for childhood arrivals. This started years ago. And these kids were taken here. They were taken across the border. Their parents are generally undocumented. And since they were already born somewhere else, they don't have a United States birth certificate. Sometimes all they have is a passport, if they're lucky. And they were brought into this country as children, very young children typically. And they're now past college age. And we've tried for years to try to make them legal citizens. And they are still not legal citizens.
And lumped in with as criminals when they've committed no criminal act.
Correct.
You can't commit a criminal act if
Yes.
you're 9 years.
Right. And there's millions of them, you guys. There's millions of these DACA kids. And they also are under threat of deportation.
Yes.
And now the Trump administration is deporting people to where they're not from, potentially. And we'll get back into that. But I think until the Trump administration, I had not heard of that occurring. And so I think there was a very large shift in immigration policy that suits the Trump administration to try to deport people to where they are not even from. But since I opened that can of worms, so like, for instance, if you're from Myanmar, that Myanmar doesn't exist anymore. Or I'm sorry, Burma. If you're from Burma, Burma doesn't exist anymore. It's Myanmar now, which is a dictatorship. It's an authoritarian government. Yeah, you can't get into Myanmar. And so if you came from Burma in like the 1980s, they can't send you back to Myanmar because that's not your country. But now they can send you to whatever country they want to, potentially, if that country is willing to accept you, which is a very scary thing. So people had deportations essentially stalled by a judge for years and years and years. So we're talking 1980s, right, for some of these people. So like 40 years at this point. But now they can get potentially deported to anywhere that is willing to take them. 40 years just because we couldn't get documentation pushed through, for some of these people. It's just astounding, really. So again, immigration stories, look them up, podcasts. You got to hear the stories in order to actually believe some of this stuff, because it really is, some of it, unbelievable.
It wouldn't be overly cynical to say that there's a huge profit motivation behind this.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Not building these $1 million detention centers, let them sit empty.
No, no, a lot of our criminal institutions are privately run. They're overseen by either the state or the federal government, but they are contracted to various sources. And privatizing uh, criminal institutions like prisons incentivizes those essentially companies to keep as many people imprisoned as they possibly can because people are essentially worth money at that point. Um,
It's a beast that must be fed.
it is. It is. We have the largest population of incarceration in the free world in the United States of America. Yep, we surely do, and this is definitely playing a part of that. But the scary part about this in particular is ICE is just kind of a black hole. The federal government is not keeping track of these folks
No
well.
transparency in the process.
None,
Absolutely.
none. And so we talk about alligator Alcatraz. We don't know who was there.
I cannot remember the name of the place in suburban Chicago. It's a Broadmoor.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Well, they're not allowing the elected representatives in to inspect it, and the stories coming out from previous detainees are just horrible.
Right. That was the same thing in
Overcrowded,
Miami.
eating, inhumane treatment,
Right.
which I don't understand how we allow this in our name.
Right. I mean, the Human Rights Watch came into alligator Alcatraz when there were reports of people being chained with their hands and feet to the floor and being forced to eat food like they were a dog off of a tray off the floor. I mean, what on earth is that kind of treatment? And why would you ever need to treat somebody like that? So yes, the stories coming out of these places are absolutely horrendous. We absolutely have to have oversight of these institutions because no one's being allowed in, and we don't know where people are going, where they're being transferred to. There's no standard for how long people are being held there. I mean, government accountability is absolutely one of the largest things that makes America America, right? We keep our government in check. What made America, right? And now with this institution called ICE, it is just gone. And it's just absolutely mind-blowing that this is not, to me, a much bigger issue all across the board.
Proves that the dehumanizing process is effective and thorough. Can you imagine being a guard at Alligator Alcatraz or some other facility and witnessing, or worse, participating in that type of abuse of another person? The only way you can do it, in my opinion, is if you see them as something less than human. And they've been very good about instilling that in the public. Most people are kind of tuned out, and it's no matter how much noise is generated by advocates and political parties, it just doesn't seem to crack the bubble people find themselves in,
Right.
The media bubble's part of it.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, broken promises by our government and broken policies and violations of the Constitution, really, right to a speedy and a fair trial in a lot of cases is not being upheld whatsoever. And then we have just the reversal of policies that have been in place for a long time. We talked about CPB-1. We talked about the Haitians. Afghanistan was another one. We had refugee status for our partners that served along the United States military in Afghanistan. Those were rolled back.
Even the interpreters.
Yes. These people who were promised citizenship by our government because they served have now been told no by this administration. Yes. We have family separation. We have increased deportations without the proper hearings in place. We have deporting people to countries other than their own. We have this crazy ICE detention. We had CCOT, oh, which is just this whole another animal. Deporting somebody to a country that's not their own to imprison them. I mean, these are things that our forefathers wrote into the Declaration of Independence as grievances against the king. I mean, and we're doing these things to people now. We had
El Salvador, Sudan, I understand, is now readying to accept detainees.
Oh, I hadn't heard about that one. I'd have to look at that one too.
Yeah, and Sudan, as you know, is like Haiti, one of the most dangerous places on the planet right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a tough environment. We were using Guantanamo Bay for a little while. I'm not sure if we're still utilizing that or not, but we were taking military flights and removing people to Guantanamo Bay as judges were telling them no, and the Trump administration was essentially saying too bad. I mean, it's just absolutely insane.
It's rendition writ large, right? The practice of removing suspected terrorists to these locations. Okay, maybe you can justify that in the aftermath of 9/11 for a period of time. I don't agree that torture was an integral part of it, but there are people who believe that it helped. Okay, you can say that in the fervor after 9/11, those things are bound to happen. I think we were able to rein it in. This, I don't know where this ends. Absent a change of administration and policy.
Well, I hope it ends with something better now. So let's go on.
Any step forwards.
That's it. So right now, I think we have to stop the bleeding. And I think the best way to do that is to lift up our voices and call our representatives every chance that we get on this and let them know that we have not forgotten, because ICE raids are continuing, deportations are continuing. To continue to show up at protests. We have them in Nashville occasionally for Mr. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who the government had removed to El Salvador, then was forced to take back. Then they tried to bring him up on, we'll call them trumped up charges, stemming from a trooper stop here in Tennessee, actually. And they charged him with human trafficking. And so far, that evidence has been very slim. And so now they're trying to remove him to another country before it ever goes to trial. And so there are opportunities to get out there and protest safely and peacefully, of course, is what we always do, calling our representatives, calling our senators. But also, we have Afton Bain, who is coming up in District 7, and this is Robertson County, and we can vote for Afton as a step toward mitigating some of these issues. She will be a Democratic voice.
She's not new to advocacy.
She's not. She is an advocate, and she will be a Democratic voice and a Democratic vote at the national level to help stop some of these cruel policies. So I think
there are things, too, that we can do as not just Democrats, but as people, right? One of the areas that we keep losing ground, and I don't fully understand it, is in the churches, right? I took a drive. Where did I go? Costco, right? It's out in Hendersonville. So between my house and Costco, I counted no fewer than 16 churches in 6 miles, 7 miles, whatever it is, 10 miles. I'll bet you there isn't a progressive voice being heard in any of them. I've been to many of them. I get invited a lot. And people are reluctant, I guess, to espouse views that are not seen as part of that particular tribe, if you will. We have to be braver than that. We have to find some people who are willing to advocate in their church groups, in their work groups, amongst their coworkers. I mean, this has to be it's happening organically, but not it's not scaling, and it needs to.
We had our very first podcast episode. We had one of our local ministers on, and he said people love to talk Bible around here, and that's true. And so we actually do
You should
hope
read
to
Matthew.
yes get some folks on here who were very conservative and sometimes pastors themselves, and who have changed their viewpoints on that. And so I think that'll be a very interesting conversation to get in with them on some MAGA policies versus immigration policy, because those two, when you look at biblical viewpoints
Yeah.
and the New Testament, it's hard to rectify our current immigration policies. It truly is.
Right, and that's just one front, right? So the others are countering some of the very easily counterable narratives that have somehow, like taking American jobs. If you really think that through, I'm an employer, say, and I've got some openings, and there are, a handful of English-speaking American people willing to take that job, and there's a handful of non-American, non-English-speaking people, right? Just for business sake, I'm going to get group A, right, until it's exhausted. Well, if there is no group A, you have this group B. That's what you're going to pick from. My
Right.
point being, let's say I was in McDonald's. I rarely go to McDonald's, but I was in one, and there's nothing but brown faces. Okay, I remember when those slots were filled by white teenagers.
Hmm.
And they're not doing that now. McDonald's still has to run their franchises, and so they're taking who they can take. Not to say that the workers are not as good, heck, they're as good or better, but it's problematic when the culture is different and the language is different.
Right.
But they're willing to deal with that so that they've got a supply of workers. And this goes on in every industry. Like
Right.
I said, the trades are full of non-American workers. The medical
Hmm.
field is starting to become that way.
Right.
It's you asked earlier who these people are. They're the people that are killing and slaughtering our meat and picking our crops and cleaning our hotel rooms. That's who
Right.
these people are.
The Trump administration started figuring that out a few months
Yeah.
ago, too, when the economy started taking a massive hit, especially on the farming front. And they go, well, not all of them are bad, especially not the ones helping farmers. And it's like, well, okay, now you've just made an exception, not a very personable one, but now you've made an economic exception here. And that just doesn't make sense. When you look at it rationally, they're admitting that they made a mistake. They still want to do it, but they're like, hang on, it's starting to hurt our pocketbook a little bit.
Yeah.
And you're right. We have an aging population, and we have a huge number of undocumented immigrants that work in the medical space. And it will, elderly care especially,
Childcare.
and it will be tougher for my generation to take care of our aging parents potentially, because of the lack of workforce. If people are scared to come to work or apply to jobs or leaving the country. So elderly care will become an issue, especially when you couple that with cuts to Medicaid, childcare, things like
I'm
that.
one of the sandwich generation, had elderly parents to take care of and kids to take care of.
That's it.
It's a feat.
It is. It sure is.
We were talking about talking points, if I might.
Yeah.
Another one that seems to stick is that these immigrants get free services and don't pay taxes. These are the type of thing when in fact they do pay taxes.
They sure do.
And they never get a chance to get that money back.
No.
And they don't get any services. They'll get the emergency room service if they need it because they're not allowed to turn away anybody. It's critical.
Right.
But beyond that, no, there's no well care. There's
right.
It's persistent, really difficult to counter, but this is an area that we have to, people to understand how it is they don't pay taxes and they think, oh, they're just being paid cash. Well, that's almost impossible to do anymore.
Right.
You can do it. You go pick up a guy at the Home Depot and he works for you for a day and you hand him $100, whatever. Sure. But that's not what we're really talking about.
No.
So most people don't know how this is done. And it's done like this. The undocumented are able to secure just enough paperwork uh, to satisfy some pretty loose I-9 requirements,
Hmm.
right? And a lot of times those are outsourced to third parties so that the company does not bear any responsibility. But what company has an HR department anymore? Few.
Right.
Okay. So this is outsourced. And by the time the authorities snap to the fact that they're, sort of funneling these people in and not checking the paperwork that thoroughly, that's closed and another one pops up. It's a dirty little secret that we have to have these people here, and yet we continue to penalize them
Right.
for being here.
Right. They pay state taxes every time they pay grocery, they pay sales tax. And people also don't know that they do also pay federal tax. A lot of them do. That's it. They have a TIN. People go, well, they don't have a social. How do they pay tax? So some of them use a TIN, a tax identification number. And one of the things,
happily give you, they want the money.
right, exactly. And when they appear before an immigration judge, one of the things that they can be asked is, have you paid taxes? And they want their citizenship, and they're hard workers, and they go, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, here you go. I've paid my taxes through my TIN. We've collected hundreds of billions of dollars of taxes through undocumented immigrants as the United States. Just this past year, billions of dollars.
You not call that theft.
Right, right. And so this whole narrative of, oh, they don't pay taxes is just absolute garbage. And this whole narrative of, oh, if they would just do it the right way, then we wouldn't have a problem. Yep. Well, that constantly shifts. So that has to go out the window. So what do you have left, really, as an argument for why these people shouldn't have their citizenship? Yep. And you probably don't really want that answer if you're one of those people that's now looking at immigrants.
The cynical among us will say, okay, the right likes to say, well, the left is grooming these people to be their voters. What's interesting to me is that the right was making serious inroads with the Hispanic community in particular, right? And just to toss it all away with this ICE performative type nonsense is really doing nothing except terrorizing the immigrants. You're not removing the worst of the worst.
No, no.
They're filling quotas and having photo shoots and
that's it.
Buying planes with no engines.
The worst of the worst are already in jail. They do time in American jail and then they get deported.
That's not to say they don't exist among us. Sure, they do. They will out. They will show themselves.
Yes.
We have a lot of
right. But to be picking up people who are just coming to do their regularly scheduled meeting or trying to nab people off the street through a checkpoint. Oh my gosh. That's right. Right. Unbelievable. Right.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of work as Democrats to do, I think. And unfortunately, we've always been willing to compromise on things. And I think immigration policy is one of those things that we've compromised on for far too long as Democrats now. And it's left the door open. It's left the door open for this type of action. And so I see this as a hot button issue moving forward for Democrats. But there's lots of hot button issues at the moment among Democrats, but
the trick is to solve the problem so it doesn't stay.
That's it. What can we do in your mind as just generally? We're not talking policy specifics, but just generally, what do you think we can do as a nation?
It's going to be a slow drip, drip, drip. We don't collectively have the will, it doesn't appear to me, to build the infrastructure necessary to process immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, whatever. It would require facilities to intake and basic services provided so that these people are they're arriving hungry and thirsty and dirty and disoriented and lost, and right. So a humane approach would be to have systems in place to get them some clothing, get them some bathing facilities, you know what I'm saying, get them a hot meal, and then start the assimilation process at that point. We also obviously need our legal system to be able to accommodate, and that's going to require judges. And we are spending the money anyway on these inhumane type practices that we're doing now. These detention centers are being built at, billions of dollars. Why not put that into the intake process and the monitoring process, and eventually provide a path to citizenship or at least a legal right to work? We have to have the collective will for that. And apparently, it's going to happen from the bottom up, and it's going to be a slow drip, drip, drip type process. And again, it's going to be a lot of people that understand at least a little bit about the issue, talking to people who don't understand anything about the issue, but yet have strong opinions.
Right.
It's not an easy calling as a Democrat or an advocate. That's what we got to do.
That's it. And it's hard work, and it's not easy, but I do believe that as much as we can have a case for immigrants on the front of the economy, and we can have a case for immigrants that is actually beneficial for the United States to have people documented who are already here. Ultimately, the moral arc of the universe, I think, bends toward justice, and it's the right thing to do for these people that have been here for years and years.
We solved in our lifetime.
Move
the ball.
We're gonna do that, and I think the first thing for all you guys listening, especially if you're in District 7, is a vote for Afton. Vote for Afton Bain. I'm going to throw the shameless plug in there every chance that I get, because it is so important. It's important for...
Yeah, she's a fiery voice.
She is.
We need those. We need as many as we can get. There's going to be room in this party. And that's the other thing, too, is that people don't really understand what big tent politics is, but it means that there are going to be people within the tent that disagree with you. And fiery orators like AOC, they oftentimes get shunned because they're fired, but we need them, and she seems to fit.
That's it. People catch flack. You very well know this yourself for speaking up for justice and doing the right thing. There's strong opposition voices against that. But it's time that we all band together, especially in this current climate. And the people who we're fighting for are worth it. We've got to speak out on their behalf because they deserve it.
Everybody knows. Yes, that's exactly right. Everybody knows immigrants, right? Everybody knows somebody. There's not much separation between any single American and an immigrant, an undocumented immigrant. It's probably fixed your roof,
right?
Built, paved your driveway, cleaned your hotel room, whatever. And for some reason, I was in Bass Pro Shop over the weekend, I think, and I went in to use the restroom, and there was a young Hispanic man there just whistling and cleaning the stalls and cleaning the urinals, and he was smiling, and everybody was coming in and out. Nobody even acknowledged him, that he was there. And I'm remembering this because as a kid, I remember the first time I ever went to a fancy restaurant and walked in, and there was a man there. It was usually a black man that had your towels to dry your hands, or he'd hand you your soap or whatever. And he had a little tip jar. And, not many people acknowledge the people that are doing the grunt work, even less so if they're the other, if they're seen as less than human. So, I don't know how to change the narrative overnight. I know it's just going to be people with voices and platforms like this and candidates like Afton to...
That's it. Yeah. That's it. Folks, you got to listen to the immigration stories, listen to the podcast. You got to call the reps, you got to call the senators, and you got to get out and you got to vote. And then anything else that you're able to do on top of that for our immigrant community is amazing. Thank you guys so much for listening. Mack, thank you so much. We appreciate all the work that you've done and continue to do, and really appreciate you being here.
The people that are doing the work are still doing it. Turk does an amazing job, and there are other advocates out there. I've been out of the game for a little bit, but I was happy to come and talk.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next time.